Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to today's APAC Med webinar. Let's give ourselves 30 seconds while we wait for the rest to come online. So we have a huge group that have registered. I think we have more than 230 attendees. Yeah, so looking at the topic that we have today, I'm sure it will make for good discussion. Okay, I'll start by giving a very brief introduction. Hello everyone once again, and thank you for joining us for today's APAC Med webinar. My name is Gabriel. I'm the Partnership Director at APAC Med. As a brief introduction, APAC Med is a not-for-profit medical technology association. We represent companies operating in the medical device, the diagnostics, and the digital health space. What we do is that we lead efforts to advance medical technologies in order to raise the standards of care for patients. Today, we would like to do a deep dive into the EU MDR, or the European Union Medical Device Regulation, the most significant regulatory change in over 20 years. The Europe-wide medical device regulations has come into effect, presenting both challenges and opportunities for MedTech companies and stakeholders in the Asia-Pacific region. Today, we are really delighted to bring, 4 individuals from our member companies, Chris, Alex, Dana, and Matt, with us to help us to better understand the EU MDR as the MedTech regulatory environment in Europe enters a new era. Our moderator for today is Chris Hardesty from KPMG. He leads the healthcare practice at KPMG, and I'll leave it to him to introduce the panelists. Chris, over to you.
Well, many thanks, Gabriel, and to APAC Med as always for convening such a forum, and I hope everyone out there is taking care. As Gabriel said, we have a lot of registrations for the session today, which is wonderful. I can see a high degree of interest, and we have representation from multinational companies to middle to smaller companies, contract manufacturers, testing groups, distributors, so quite a wide variety, and I look forward to hearing from all of you throughout the session as well. Of course, a lot of us have been naturally distracted by COVID-19 for the past couple of years, but we shouldn't let that disguise the fact that, as Gabriel said, one of the biggest transformations in MedTech regulation has also been occurring and in fact is now in effect. So we're going to learn what that means today. And it's more than just regulation for safety. What we're talking here is about a regulation that changes the way the value chain works in terms of transparency in the transactions, the types of data that need to be shared, the way MedTech product lifecycle management is going to work. So it has very far-reaching implications that we're going to discuss today too. And as Gabriel said, we'll use the short term EU MDR, but of course that does mean the European Union Med Device Regulation, but you'll hear us use EU MDR as the kind of short term for it. And we'll also talk about, is this just a trend for Europe, or is it involving other geographies around the world, and not only into the markets we sell to, but also outbound. So it's just kind of a whole wave phenomenon going on that we'll dig into today. So in terms of agenda, what we're going to do is we're going to have one of the speakers just for kind of 5 to 10 minutes share a little bit about what is EU MDR, some of the basics, just so you have a good level of understanding there. And then we'll hear from the other 2 panelists, their kind of initial remarks, and then really just open it up after that. So I always say, make these sessions yours. I mean, as a panel, we've all agreed to some discussion prompts that we can go through, but that's quite the boring way to do it. So we'd love to hear from you guys. Put things in the chat. We'll take them as we go. And again, make this session yours. Take this opportunity to really get to hear from some of our distinguished guests, who I will introduce in each turn momentarily. Before we get started, just to have a bit of fun, we'll also do a poll. So maybe if APAC Med can pull that up, and just want to figure out kind of where everyone is, in terms of your level of familiarity with EU MDR. So just take a minute to answer that. Okay, maybe Nishan, you can flash the results. All right, so panelists take note there, kind of middle ground. Good. And like I said, please do put your questions and comments for us as well. If you've, got points to make based on your own experiences so far, that's wonderful. And obviously, if you have some clarification, then that's the purpose of the session today, to give you the best answers we can. So with that, let's press on. As I said, the first segment here, we'll just have a little presentation on kind of what is EU MDR to level set. It seems like a lot of you have some familiarity there, so we'll kind of drive that part forward. But with this, I'd like to introduce Diana, who is the Senior Legal and Compliance Officer at QTech, and she's dialing in from Germany, so right in the heart of the EU MDR matters going on. So Diana, over to you to give your presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here. This will be a fast and furious ride for the next 10 minutes, just to point out some bullet points on the regulatory requirements. We will talk about multiple personalities. We have a book here in Germany. It's called Who I Am, and if yes, how many? And this is right, perfect description of this topic, economic operators. We will have a short look at the remaining dates and timelines, and we will talk about why you should your partners choose very carefully for the next years. So start with bullet points. We have a broader scope than before. We have included now devices without a medical purpose, just acting like medical devices. And we have, for example, devices incorporating material of human origin. We have very specific requirements regarding the QMS, the quality management system, in addition to the requirements of the standard. So they coming on top. We have more detailed requirements regarding the risk management system, the conformity assessment documentation, and post-market surveillance and clinical evaluation processes. For example, you must provide a rationale for classification of your devices now, and you must justify why your device is under the scope of the MDR and why it is not excluded from that. We have new requirements regarding the obligations of economic operators, like manufacturers, of course, but also importers, distributors, and authorized representatives. We're talking about sampling, documentation, registration, and surveillance. We have new, yes?
Sorry, are you just speaking, or you wanted to share the slides with the
Yeah, I should share this slide.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
Sorry.
You to get too far without that.
Yes.
Okay.
I was very, very fast.
Yes.
You can see it now?
All good.
So we talked about the broader scope, the additional requirements on the quality management system, on documentation of specific processes, and new requirements for the economic operators. And right now we are for the new and extensive requirements regarding the registration and labeling obligations coming with UDAMED and the UDI system. And we have some new classification rules and additional procedures for conformity assessment procedures. So let's talk about our multiple personalities. Very brief, we have the manufacturer. It's quite clear, own brand, own name, and full responsibility. We have your authorized representative if you're a manufacturer outside the European Union. You must assign such an authorized representative, and this authorized representative can act on the manufacturer's behalf, only on your behalf. And we have importers, which places a device from a third country, so-called third country if you're outside the European Union, on the union market. And we have distributors, just persons in the supply chain. And if you're located inside the European Union, you can have more than one of these roles. Outside the European Union, you will always be a manufacturer, I think. So let's talk about your manufacturer's obligations. You must establishing a risk management system according to the standard 4971. And we have a problem with that standard because it's not matching in all points the requirements of the MDR. So be careful. You must conduct a clinical or performance evaluation in accordance with the MDR or IVDR. And this is also for class 1 devices. And it's also true for accessories. You must draw up and keep up to date technical documentation, also for class 1 devices and also for accessories. And the declaration of conformity, and you must affix the CE marking on the device. I think this will be the good part. You must comply with the requirements on UDI labeling and registration, and this is quite a problem because we don't have the infrastructure for that. You must assign an authorized representative for all of your devices you want to place on the European market. You must implement a quality management system, and I don't see a good way to skip the standard 3485. And you must implement and keep up to date a post-market surveillance system. And this is really a big issue because there are very, very strong requirements on this system for reporting and recording of incidents, field safety, corrective actions, and trend reporting. And you cannot hand over any of these responsibility to a third party, not even to your authorized representative. This means the so-called OEM or PLM model is dead. Yeah, to make it clear. Yeah, some timelines. Yeah, it's really fast, right? I know. The new MDR is valid from 26th of May this year. So every new device and every device undergoing a significant change must be MDR compliant. And also all class 1 devices which do not need a notified body under the MDR. So the smallest devices, the less complicated devices must be the first to be MDR compliant. Legacy devices means devices for which you have a valid MDD certificate can be placed under the market under this certificate until 26th May of 2024. This is also true for certain devices which recently need a notified body involved for the conformity assessment. This is in most parts true for reusable surgical devices class 1 and for some software applications. Devices already placed on the market under this valid MDD certificate can be continued to be made available on the market or put into service, so you can sell them in the European market until 26 May 2025. And UDAMED registration obligations for UDI, economic operators, clinical investigations and vigilance, 6 months after the respective notice in the official journal of the European Commission. This is not a big topic because we don't await this in the next 2 years maybe, but resulting from this are coming several registration obligations in the member states now. The registration obligation for devices are coming 24 months after this notice. and the labeling obligations. And you must differentiate between registration UDI and labeling UDI. These labeling obligations, so putting the UDI code on the devices or on their packaging, is depending on the risk class of the device. Started with class 3 devices and implants this year, going up to 2027 for reusable class 1 devices. So make sure you know your risk class and your timeline. So I said you should choose your partner very carefully. There are some obligations for an authorized representative and some tasks he must fulfill. A good authorized representative will offer you additional services, and you should use this. He can and he will identify and close gaps in your technical documentation, and there are always gaps, huge gaps. He will guide you with the most suitable conformity assessment route. There are different routes, and not in any time Annex 9 is the best route for you. He can gather actively information from the market for your post-market surveillance system. And this will be one of your biggest topics in the future, your post-market surveillance system and active gathering of information. He can help you with that. He can support you in case of incidents or problems with the national competent authorities. He speaks their language. He knows how to talk, which way to go, and which measures will be suitable. He can provide you with updates on new European or national regulatory requirements. As I said before, we will have national registration obligations until UDMED is full in place. And he can make sure that you have always the current and valid standards and guidance available. And the risk management standard is the best example for why you should not choose an ISO standard, but lean always on the European harmonized standard. So, short break and short summary. You have much higher stakes for medical devices manufacturers from this year on. Big post-market surveillance and registration obligations, also for legacy devices. Yes, there's no transition period in the topic of post-market surveillance and registration. They are excluded from this transition period. These obligations are already valid for your devices, for all of your devices. No grandfathering. You have more requirements for documentation and labeling of devices, so you should start now. New classification rules and additional procedures. Make sure you choose the right way to get on the market. And you have the full responsibility, if you are the manufacturer, so your name and your brand, for the complete technical documentation, the supply chain, and your subcontractors. You cannot rely on any certificates from your subcontractors, service providers, or suppliers anymore. They will help you, of course, but they cannot replace validation or verification. Yeah, I hope. Yeah, 10 minutes. I think I get it.
Well done, Diana. I think it was, yeah, it was a good overview to kind of level set, but also provide some specificity since there is an audience that has some familiarity already. We are getting some questions flying in. So there's a couple here that I'll save for the panel, which is more on this transition from NDD to MDR. And anyway, I think Matt's going to touch a little bit on that in his remarks too. So I'll save those. Maybe just to knock out two quick questions now, though. So one, which is the classical, are these slides going to be available? So for those who didn't manage to take a screenshot while she was presenting, I think that, yeah, they will be shared around after. And maybe one other one, Diana, I think this is a quick question, so I hope you're able to answer it. If not, we can do it in the panel as well. But there was a question here for a company that's a class 2B without a legacy CE mark. And so they were wondering if they can do their clinical evaluation under MDR just with a literature review and then post-market surveillance, or if they have to kind of be more extreme than that. So do you have a view on that, or do you prefer that as a panel question?
No, I can answer that. You just have to fulfill the requirements of the medical device regulation now. And from our experience in the last 6 months, there is no really big difference anymore between the legacy devices and clinical evaluations under the MDD and then what the notified body wants to see under the MDR. So you must comply with the medical device regulation now, no matter how if it's a legacy device or not.
Sounds good. Thanks. And Matt, when I come to the panel too, if others want to comment on that too, please feel free to do so. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Diana. Again, I see some questions coming in, so we'll be sure to take those, but let's kind of keep things going forward here. Before I call in Matt and Alex to share their remarks, we have our second poll here for the audience. So based on what you know of EU MDR and what you've heard from Diana, just wondering what you think this does to Europe as an expansion market. Does this make it more attractive, less attractive? What is going to be your corporate strategy here? Okay, maybe Sean, you can flash the results there. Okay, so no complete market change there, but definitely adding a layer of complexity, which of course we would all expect. So, but it's interesting. One thing we'll talk about today as well is if you are able to achieve compliance in this space, what that can do from a strategic advantage perspective as well. So I do see some people that kind of answered it in that way, which is also quite interesting. Okay, well, let me finish introducing the panel here, and then we'll kind of open things up. So next I'll call on Matt, since just I had given the names in that order. So Matt presently is the International R&D Ops Director at Genesis MedTech, but he's going to give us some views as a former notified body, the impetus for this legislation, and then also, as some of the audience questions have asked, how we make this transition from MDD to MDR. So Matt, over to you, and then I'll bring in Alex as well.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. The folks who in the audience who might know me from the past know me as an ISO and CE mark auditor. I am based here out of Singapore. So my perspective today is not from the industry side, but to talk a little bit about how the notified bodies have been addressing the buildup to the MDR release. So from the perspective of the regulators, from the notified body side, the buildup for the MDR is long time coming. The standard text was originally published back in 2017. So all parties involved have had a good picture of what was coming with the MDR. And if you have one of the higher quality notified bodies, they may have started to work some of these requirements into your product reviews or ISO audits, CE mark audits, in the meantime, in 2018, 2019, and 2020. Customers of mine will remember that we discussed areas like changes in clinical evaluations, post-market surveillance, and post-market clinical follow-up. UDI, all these things that Diana has touched on already. Risk management principles throughout the entire product lifecycle, as well as design and manufacturing control, and then extent of control of subcontractors and the supply chain. Diana very smartly touched on almost all of these topics in her presentation already. For you that have seen some of this stuff already, congratulations, you're already a bit further along the MDR audit chain and have a bit better understanding of how this is going to be implemented. As Diana also talked about, this is a complete industry review. Every single product family that's currently on the market is going to have to be reassessed under the MDR rules. For the notified bodies, this creates obviously a huge workload. Everything gets reviewed from scratch. No products are going to be grandfathered. No approvals will be granted without compliance with the MDR requirements. One of the things that I saw in some of the reviews that I had done prior to me leaving the notified body were the depth of the reviews done starts really at the ground level. And what I mean is small details and things that might have been assumed in MDD product reviews were now being reviewed under the MDR. Early things, I'll give an example of sterilization, those of you who are familiar with sterile products, looking at the validation of your biological indicators and how you derive reduction factors. You have to note that in your product reviews. Otherwise, you're going to get a flag put up and they're going to make you stop and go back and add that in. So again, they're going through your product submissions with a fine-tooth comb. Be prepared for that. And as something Diana talked about as well, there are fewer and fewer notified bodies. In the 2014-2015 period, there was almost, I think it was over 80 notified bodies in the industry. As of today, 20 are approved. Significant, huge reduction in the number of notified bodies that are available in this. If you're in the IVDR, only 5 are approved at this point. So from a service perspective, yes, notified bodies are a service provider, but there are huge queues already for products to get into. And then there are these new rules that not only do the manufacturers and the authorized representatives have new responsibilities, the notified bodies themselves also have significant new responsibilities. So they are going to be very conservative with how they make device reviews and device approvals. So the takeaways that I'm going to leave you with are fewer notified bodies mean reduced choice for industry customers. The notified bodies themselves are competing for qualified personnel able to do MDR capable reviews. They're competing against industry and they're competing against government regulators, all who offer attractive alternatives to doing notified body reviews. The scope of activities under the MDR means a huge amount of work is being taken on by the notified bodies. Reviews are going to be more challenging and go into a finer level of detail. And the final takeaway, review costs are going to go up significantly and review times are going to be extended well beyond what you're used to under the MDD. Unfortunately, this is the new normal. So you're going to have to understand that this is just going to be the way of doing business. Okay, with that, Chris, I'll turn it back to you and I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Matt, for sharing some of those, from the ground perspectives. And you wear multiple hats these days, and you can take some of these questions later along the same lines. And that was a good segue, actually, because I think now we want to hear from a multinational medical device company in terms of what this has meant and some of the operational impacts. So I'll bring in Alex, who's the Becton Dickinson Greater Asia Vice President of Regulatory Affairs. And he's just going to explain what it's been like to register and re-register their products, the kind of remediation activities as a result of becoming compliant, and really what this has meant operationally and financially to the company. So Alex, your remarks too. And I do see questions coming in the chat, so we'll address those once Alex is finished. Thanks, everyone. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly a privilege to be in this panel. I always learn new things, and one thing I think Diana just reminded us is to choose our partner carefully. So I had to actually reflect on that a little bit. So I think Matt and Diana provided sort of the landscape and the impact of this change. And I was a bit intrigued to see the outcome of the first poll, right? That 70% of the participants here, the audience, somewhat familiar. And you learned from Diana that MDR has actually gone live, last month. So the fact that the majority of the participants are only somewhat familiar, I can only imagine that the majority of participants are not from regulatory or quality, and they're probably too busy to be joining this webinar anyway. So this is good because I if I could represent my colleagues in regulatory and quality, there is just so much more to know with regards to the impact of MDR or IVDR, specifically in the region, right? We might think, well, this is on a European regulation, so what's the impact to us in APAC? Huge impact, because I'm sure BD is not unique with regards to the high number of SKUs that are CE mark, right? Companies tend to go for CE mark first as a first registration. It used to be easy. It's certainly not going to be easy anymore, as you've heard from Matt and Diana. So the majority of the products that we sell, at least in BD and APAC, carry CE mark, almost up to 50%. And the type of changes that will happen as a result of the remediation and moving to the new regulations will most likely have impact in countries in the region. You look at China, you look at Korea, you look at India, many countries will be impacted. And with such a tight timeline, specifically on IVDR, which is going to go live next May, we're going to have to really look at how we can continue to service the market with the existing products while going through all these change notifications that are going to be required in most countries in the region. And that's, for us, is massive. For companies such as BD, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars with regards to the impact. That's just from the inventory, the storage cost, the additional productions that have to be done, before the cutover to MDR or IVDR. In terms of budget, you've seen probably some estimates, up to 5% of at least the revenue that is generated from these products have to be spent for remediation. I can tell you in BD, we're probably spending north of that with regards to the budget. And this is not just a transition impact, right? I think there's going to be a long-lasting impact that Matt talked about, between the number of notified bodies will be reduced, the review time, the cost. So that's going to be just the kind of the normal way in the regulatory, unfortunately, right? And it's not just in Europe. I mean, we're seeing in other countries as well that are, the bar is always moved up. So this is something that we in the industry need to just really be prepared for and understand, what's going to take to bring products to the market. In this case, with CE mark.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Alex, for kind of filling in the picture there. And I was thinking, as you were talking too, it's not as if BD or any multinational company is just sitting with a static product portfolio too. I mean, you're constantly concurrently launching new products and evolving products. So very complex situation to deal with all at the same time. So. Okay, well, great. Well, for everyone out there, now you've heard from our three panelists, so time to open things up. I'm happy that we can basically throw out our script, which I did agree with the panelists in advance as that was what was acceptable to do, because we've got enough kind of audience questions here. So let's do that and have a bit of fun. What if I could suggest to the panelists, we can just kind of give some quick answers, and for those of you who want to answer something, do. For those of you who don't have anything else to contribute, no problem. We'll just kind of keep going through things because there's a lot of questions flowing in. Okay. So the first one, and I'm going to rephrase it slightly because I think there's some intent behind the question, is basically class 1, right? And if I could ask maybe the panelists here to give a bit of creativity. So obviously, if you're class 1, there's some maybe strategies there for being compliant, or maybe other strategies for other mechanisms for continuing to sell your device in the markets, right? Depending on kind of level of risk or how you are positioning your product. So maybe whoever wants to just kind of talk a little bit about experience with class 1, and if you have any strategies here for the companies out there with class 1 devices, and whoever wants to take a crack at it, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe Chris, I can share our experience with class 1, right? Those that are in scope of MDR. Our position was that we needed to go and switch over to the class 1 post the May 26th deadline. Like to hear from Diana and Matt with regards to how much flexibility you think there is with regards to the kind of the transition for class 1?
Yeah, I think the big problem is for most of the class 1 devices, which are not sterile or have a measuring function and are not reusable surgical instruments. So normal class 1 devices, simple class 1 devices, there is no transition period. They have to be MDR compliant since May. So if you're a manufacturer for class 1 devices, I should recommend you that you should clearly choose your authorized representative, choose a good authorized representative, make sure that your importers in the EU market and their distributors know their obligations. So you stay out of the focus from the competent authorities and draw up your technical documentation as soon as you can. And I know this is for most of the manufacturers for class 1 devices, this is a completely new topic somehow. Draw up a technical documentation, must include risk management, clinical evaluation, and post-market surveillance. Make sure you draw up these documents as soon as you can, as fast as you can. And meanwhile, make sure your importers and your authorized representatives do their job and keep you out of the focus from the competent authorities. This is the best advice I can give you.
Matt, anything else you want to add to this one, or has it been well covered?
I think Diana covered it very, very well. So I'll just, I think we can move on to the next.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of cluster a couple things that are related to what you've said, and that way we can just knock out some of these audience questions in turn. So maybe just a quick one for you, Diana, based because you were just talking about authorized representatives. So there's a quick question in here. You know, can your authorized representative be based in the UK these days? Given, I guess.
No.
Oh, there you go. Didn't have to explain that one any further. Okay.
And not in Switzerland also.
Yeah, I was going to say, right, with the MRA being in limbo as well. I think Europe is shrinking.
Okay, and here's another one. Again, I'm just kind of going in order based on the conversation flow. So we talked about different classifications of devices and what the impact would have there. Here's a question here around changing the, I guess, jurisdiction of registration from CE mark to other places like FDA or Japan. Has anyone seen a strategy around this, or any advice?
Yeah, I can comment on that. We've done that, and I mentioned earlier, and in my previous life, you know, CE is always the first one you go after, right? You know, you work with notified bodies who are, you know, third-party reviewers, you know, unless you have a very high-class product or combination, you don't even have to deal with a competent authority. So it's a lot more manageable compared to, you know, FDA or, you know, even other country, you know, regulators. But with this pendulum swinging so much with the MDR, IVDR, we've actually switch, you know, our registrations from Europe CE to the FDA, believe it or not, even subjecting the plant to the FDA inspection, which we think is a lot more manageable than, you know, just some of the challenges that are brought forward with this regulations up front. So definitely that's something you know, we've done and we'll probably continue to do.
Great. Matt or Diane, any comments on that one?
Nope, I think Alex covered it.
Okay, some quite tactical ones here. So there was a question about doing the clinical studies in market, right? And if anyone has any particular guidance on the sample size to go after, I guess, in order to meet MDR requirements there.
Okay, this is, I think if I got one question as a reviewer, this would be the most popular one I think I get. With very, very few exceptions, you will never find that there is a fixed number for clinical investigation patients to be enrolled. There are, I think, 1 or 2 examples that I can think of for structural heart issues, structural heart products like valves and valve replacements. For people who are involved with those products, you can look up those numbers, and that's what they are. Remember what the focus of what the clinical evaluation is. This is a continuation of the design and development process, and it is to remove residual risk that's left over from your bench testing, your clinical literature search, and anything else. So once the notified body will defer to have you addressed the issues of residual risk in your product through a statistical and objective means for satisfying these questions. So that's basically a whole lot of words to say there's no real answer, but we know it when we see it. And this is generally left to experts in the field, clinicians, or people who have significant experience in clinical affairs to be able to determine. My recommendation is work with a good CRO organization that can help you identify like product studies that have been approved, that they have comfort level working with, and make sure that you follow their guidance, because that will help you to defend your ultimate choice of how many patients to enroll.
Good. I've got another follow-up one here for you, Matt. I think it's a quick one, but Alex or Diana, do you guys want to add anything there to the clinical study aspect? Okay. Maybe one for you, Matt, as well. So someone's asking about where they can find the list of notified bodies, in this case, specific to software as a medical device. I don't know if you happen to know, but I thought you might be the one to start there on that one. Yeah,
the current list of the approved notified bodies, those who are qualified to give MDR approval, is on the NANDO, N-A-N-D-O database. So you can run a search for notified body and NANDO in your favorite search engine, and that should spit the list out to you very quickly.
And does it specify, because here I think someone who's at software as a medical device, which is a bit of a different kind of area. So will it list on that website as well for that topic, or where would you find that information?
The specific qualifications for, that's a good question. The specific scope for the notified bodies is listed on the NANDO database, so they will tell you if they're qualified for software.
Got it. Perfect. Well, we're just knocking these out rapid fire. Okay, here's another one. So it's about this shift from the certification process, right? So manufacturers that previously had done it were approved to do it themselves and now may have to get a third party. So a particular example is given here of a class 2A device, plug packs. But again, yeah, I don't know if anyone has any advice for, do they now have to use an independent party? What are some tips there in achieving that?
Okay. I would try to answer that. It's depending upon. This plug pack is an accessory to the device, and if your supplier certified this plug pack as an accessory to a medical device, he must put a CE mark on that. And if you, as the manufacturer of the medical device working with this accessory, will include this plug pack into your device, he must not put a CE mark on this. That's a bit abstract, but this question is not coming with the standard 6061. This is a regulatory topic if you are qualifying a specific product as a medical device or as an accessory under the medical device regulation or not. Oh, spare parts, great topic. I'm getting heady. Mostly, if a manufacturer speaks about spare parts, he does mean accessories. And there's a huge difference between spare parts, replacing a specific part of a medical device while not changing its safety profile or its performance parameters, can be a spare part. But most of the so-called spare parts will be accessories. And a spare part has not to wear an CE mark itself. It's a spare part.
Okay, Matt, Alex, you want to comment on spare parts or the third-party review? Everyone good? Okay. One from earlier, which is a bit more kind of, I guess, strategic looking before thinking, but we've addressed all the questions so far, so I'll come to that. Was asking about potential extensions to some of these timelines. One of them said 2024, so I don't know if that was referring to something more IVDR related, but I guess for the things that haven't happened yet, what's the kind of general line of thinking at the moment about whether the deadlines will stick versus potential delays? Anyone want to gaze?
Maybe I can share what I asked Diana being in Europe, right? And this could be wishful thinking on our part in the industry, and BD has products, right? So IVDR is is looming out there. It's right around the corner, less than a year away. But last year we were in this predicament with the pandemic, and we were just thinking that, especially with how MedTech Europe was drumming up that there needs to be an extension. There are a lot of things that are not ready. Matt, you mentioned notified bodies 20 and 5 today. Last year, this time probably half of that, right? Maybe we had 1 for IVDR. But now the reality for IVDR with 11 months to go, there's still a lot of things that are just not there. And yes, part of it is industry's responsibility for not starting maybe earlier than we should have. But then I think the European Commission also has a lot to do with it, right? A lot of things are not ready. Notified body accreditation has been very slow. I can't imagine how 5 notified bodies can keep up with the volume of work that needs to be done. And May 2022 is the deadline. So there's been kind of speculation that maybe IVDR could be extended by a year. I certainly hope that's the case. It is outside of our control, and my advice is just assume that it's not going to be extended, right? I think we need to just make sure that we get as ready as we can be given the time frame. I have to say, just listening to some of the questions, these are questions that internally we asked ourselves maybe 2 years ago. And back then, yes, it looks like 2024 is that far out, but it's coming. And 2024 is really the last day that you could have. And that assumes your MDD certificate is valid until then, right? If your MDD certificate expires between now and 24, you can't extend it anymore. And when that expires, the MDR has to kick in. So it's not that far out, and it's definitely massive with the amount of work that needs to be done. And then you have to take into account that your notified bodies are not going to be as responsive as they used to be. Simply can't, to Matt's point about how overwhelmed they are. So that's, kind of taking a little bit off the tangent there, but I just wanted to share my reflection and observation listening to some of the questions.
Yeah, thanks. And I always see these things kind of in thirds, like a third of companies will jump out of the gate and really take it head on or leverage existing capabilities they have. A third are kind of still figuring things out and trying to make some, strategic decisions. And then a third are just kind of waiting and hoping that, there will be some kind of delay or something, right? So figure out which third you want to be in. But yeah, I don't know, Matt or Diana, any sense on timelines? I mean, for now, sticking to it.
I think they're going to stick to it, Chris. You had to look at last year when the MDR was supposed to be rolled out in May of 2020, and it took a extraordinary global event to delay that for another year. In my opinion, the EU was fully prepared to go ahead despite all of the known deficiencies in the systems around the MDR to roll it out. They had made the decision and they were going to stick to it. So if you are planning on some kind of extension, I would not plan on that. And remember that the EU waited almost up until the last couple of weeks before they actually confirmed that there would be a delay in this. The other quick point that I would make is that the number of current MDR notified bodies is 20 currently. Other notified bodies are still in the review process. Unfortunately, it is not a fast review process. So do expect that number to go up and increase a bit, but I don't know how much that will do to relieve the log jam in the review process up until we get the first round of products completely reviewed, which is not much of a bonus, a benefit for folks waiting out there.
And I hope for that final third bucket that I was saying of people sort of hoping for a delay, that now you've made them hope for another COVID-19 or something, because that's the only chance possible right now. Maybe one for you, Diana, here in the chat, because it's something we were talking a little bit about before the call, and I'm happy to hear the rest of the panel. In fact, it was part of poll number 2, right? What does this actually do to the attractiveness of Europe as an inbound market for medical devices? And I think the question is really coming from the kind of smaller company perspective, right? I mean, what do you anticipate to be some changes here or implications of this law more on the smaller companies?
Yeah, this is it's a quite difficult thing. We are afraid of cleaning the market, and we know that mostly the small and middle-sized manufacturers have to struggle more than the big companies with the new requirements. So I would anticipate that some company will not go through this, and they will find other attractive markets. But in summary, I don't think we will lose really innovation. Maybe there's a short delay coming with the new procedures and the higher stakes, and maybe some of the smaller companies think, do I really must have medical devices on my portfolio, or there are some others in some other industries, but I don't expect really a loss of innovation, big innovations in the market, because the new medical device regulation will also bring new possibilities. With cleaning the market always come new possibilities for stakeholders.
Thanks. Yeah, it's something we touched on a little bit at the beginning about how this can be converted into a strategic advantage as well, you know, for those who decide to proceed.
I'll jump in here, Chris, because I think for us to see that as an opportunity to where, you know, with our resources where we could afford, right, even though it is significant. But I would offer to those companies that might not be able to, you know, to devote so much in terms of resources that would be required, is to really ask whether you need CE mark, right? Sometimes we tend to look at it as an endorsement of quality, and there's almost this, you know, perception that, well, if we don't have CE, we can't sell in certain countries. I think it's going to change, right? Because you're not going to be the only one that is going to drop CE. And we even in BD, we've done that, where we, you know, there's no reason to have CE in this particular country. It was just a legacy thing. So we're gladly just drop it, and there's just not much of value proposition. So I imagine as a small company, if you know your target market does not need CE per se from regulatory approval, I would really challenge whether you need that from the perception of quality, right? Because I think each regulatory agency in the country has also raised the bar, and if they can approve it, I think that should be certainly more than adequate as an approval and seal of quality.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one thing we haven't gotten into tons today, because the focus is on EU MDR, but this is not just about Europe. I mean, we're seeing similar thinking or initial policy formation or even regulation in other markets too. So as you said, Alex, it's not about kind of running away from things, but running toward it, right? And kind of understanding the bigger spirit of what's trying to happen here. So yeah. Matt, any reflections on the early stage kind of community, or other advice you would give the, you know, those with probably less resources? And by the way, Diana, I think there's someone in the chat who maybe would benefit from a QTech follow-up later. So you don't have to answer the question, but they were maybe wanting a bit of help there. So yeah, what are your reflections, Matt, on this kind of earlier stage companies, you know?
Yeah, this is a great topic of discussion, Chris, and I think this will impact not only from the quality and regulatory side, but this is going to affect the administrative and business side of a lot of companies, these small and medium-sized enterprises, especially ones that are tying specific milestones within the organization to CE mark approval. Again, my speech talked about the extended time and cost of this. So companies that are tying milestones with CE mark approval or that kind of regulatory item, they're really going to have to readjust their expectations. Make sure that the top management of the organization, the CEOs, the finance people are aware of how this extended timeline and these extended costs will affect the achievement of these milestones. And that may affect investment strategy, that may affect other aspects of these companies moving forwards. Like Diana said, I don't think it'll necessarily impact innovation, but financing side and administrative side may be one of the unspoken aspects that we haven't really even begun to touch on yet as this all filters through.
Great. And as we sort of come toward the end here, I think we've taken on most of the questions, and there's some comments there in the chat too. So maybe I'll just ask each of you kind of one final thing from your respective domains, and just to have, you know, kind of close things out. So Matt, while you had the microphone, I thought one thing that might be kind of fun for the audience to hear is what were some kind of bad examples of approaches you saw or submissions given to you to review as part of this that hopefully others can learn from? So anything in particular stand out to
I do. I have an example from an excellent top quality manufacturer who has incredible in-house resources. None of the companies involved on the panel here, by the way, this is a completely different company, but they have a long history of in-house experts for technologies, for wonderful technologies, for their own sterilization methods and their own biocompatibility reviews and things like that. And their approach was to the notified body that we're the experts in this, you should be listening to us. And needless to say, that lack of humility didn't go over so well with the notified body reviewer. And we insisted on the review being done as we recommended, not as they recommended. So do understand that a lot of the former flexibility of these notified bodies is now removed. The requirements are very rigid, and you are going to have to comply with them.
What's great about that answer is I was expecting something kind of technical about the way people approach the ruling, but actually that was very much the human side of things, right? So
it's the way that people have done business for the last 20, 25 years. And under MDD, the notified bodies were advocates of the customers, and they have been flipped now into more of an enforcement tool. And that's a real sea change in how regulatory gets done. And people are, like I said, this is the new normal. People are going to have to get used to it.
Great. And maybe Alex, for you, and I know we're kind of coming close to time here, but I want to get some final remarks from you guys. So what would be kind of one major learning you've had of all this? I mean, obviously you're a seasoned regulatory affairs professional in this industry, but what's been kind of one major learning that you think the audience would benefit from?
I think I've already touched on it, Chris, and if I could emphasize it, you know, when I first got to know the size of how the resources that we're allocating to the MDR, right? The whole remediation, I was just astonished. And having come from a much smaller organization, kind of really, wow, you know, appreciated the scale of what something like BD could do. Yet, we still wish we're further ahead today than where we are. And that is just the reality of it, right? It's just very, it's not easy not to underestimate how much is required. A lot of these are unknown, and some of it is to some extent, it's beyond our control. The notified bodies, how they react. I mean, we're getting questions today from audits, surveillance audits that we have never been asked before. yes, I appreciate the transition, right? I think notified bodies have to adjust, but to expect us to all of a sudden provide all these MDD, requirements there. Diana will argue that, oh yeah, but this is all in the directives. You should have, yes, but the notified bodies never really asked for it. So it's really it's huge. So for those of you out there who have not quite understood the implications, and a lot of your business is tied to this because of CE mark or you sell in Europe, really need to get on board as quickly as you can. Contact Diana and whoever else out there who can help you, because it's right around the corner and it's massive.
Yeah, and if I were to say too, I won't put words in your mouth, and there is an element of competitive advantage, which I want to ask Diana about in closing remarks here. But I do think in times like these, especially through groups like APAC Med, industry companies helping each other and navigating through. So again, I won't put words in your mouth, but I'm sure people wanted to reach out and ask questions too, that we can help each other on this journey also.
Absolutely. If I could just say one more thing, if I put my APAC Med RA committee, Chris, is advocating the regulatory agencies. That has been something that we've been focusing on as well, right? Because there's really no need for duplications of reviews either, as much as possible. So Singapore HSA, to their credit, they've come up with their guidelines, and that's something that we're trying to go around the region and ask other other regulatory agencies to do the same, to simplify, because the work is coming their way as well.
Maybe Diana, we're out of time, but I want to make sure you have a chance. So, maybe just pick one thing. If companies, were to go forward with this and really take it head on and for what it's worth and be compliant to the fullest extent, what type of how can they convert that into a kind of competitive advantage or strategic advantage for their company? If you had kind of one example of something that they're able to do as a result of them being compliant with EU MDR, anything come to mind?
I think it's like to be a survivor. If you survived this, if you get a CE mark under the medical device regulation, you have really great products, safe devices, efficiency is proven, and yeah, you survived this. This is a special. It's a special medal of honor. You can keep it. And my last advice is really use your network, use possibilities like this, use academies, use your network. Academies, conferences, ask your questions. Even if you get in touch with anybody from the industry, ask a question, ask their experience. You're a big community now, and use this.
Super. Well, I do see some kind of more questions coming in here at the last minute, but we are going to have to wrap things up. So, but I do think the panelists, are open, or you can come back through APAC Med, and let's keep helping each other. Many thanks to Diana, Matt, and Alex for taking the time. I mean, that was really a rapid fire. I think someone said it can take months to get in front of a notified body to get answers, and you guys have probably just helped numerous companies out there keep their journey going. So many thanks for your vulnerability in that sense. I hope for those of you who are already familiar with EU MDR, we helped kind of shed some light on some new things. And as you heard from all the panelists, I mean, this is not about a checking the box exercise. This is a direction of travel for the industry and how you can take this head on and really convert it into a strategic, part of your company, whether you're large or small. So anyway, that was the spirit of today. A lot more discussion probably needs to be happening, but with that, I'll hand it back to APAC Med to close things out. Thanks. Over to you, Gabriel.
Yep. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. So I want to thank Matt, Dana, Alex, and Chris. I've learned so much, today just from the four of you and from the questions that are coming through. If you have any other questions and you want to reach out with to the panelists, please feel free to reach out with me and I'll connect you with them. So I just want to say thank you once again for joining us today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and talk again soon. Thank you, and have a good rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.